Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn from Surviving to Thriving, how colleges can use the science of positive psychology to enhance student well-being. My name is Simone Figueroa, and I am the president of You Thrive Educational Services. And for those of you who we've not had the pleasure of partnering with, a little bit about our organization, we provide proactive mental and emotional wellness curriculum to college students to help them manage stress, become more resilient, and thrive throughout their undergraduate experiences and beyond. I am so excited to be joined by one of our key contributors and instructional design advisors, Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener, who has a lot of exciting things to share with us today. And before I turn it over to Robert, I just wanted to share a little bit more about him and his work. Dr. Robert Biswas-Diener has spent his career studying groups of people traditionally overlooked by mainstream psychologists. His research on happiness has taken him to far-flung places where he has worked with Amish farmers in the United States, sex workers in India, hunters in Greenland, peace protesters in Palestine, and the Maasai of Kenya, among many others. He is a leading authority on strengths, culture, courage, and happiness, and best known for his pioneering work in the application of positive psychology. Robert is also particularly interested in how the results of positive psychology research can be applied to work, relationships, and society. He has authored more than 70 academic publications and 8 books, including The Upside of Your Dark Side, Happiness, and Positive Provocation. Robert has trained professionals at a range of organizations, including Standard Chartered Bank, Australia Department of Defense, and Humana Healthcare. He lives in Portland, Oregon, and is passionate about rock climbing, cats, and drawing. So I can't think of a better individual to be joining us today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to you, Robert.
Thank you so much, Simone. Really appreciate the kind introduction. And I especially appreciate everyone being willing to spend their time here with me, if even for a little bit. I think your time is your most precious commodity, so I'm not going to waste it, hopefully. I want to share with you information that I think is both interesting and useful to you. I want you to walk away wanting to tell other people about what we're talking about here. Tonight, when you eat dinner, I want you to say, listen to what I heard today. And so let's start with the idea of expertise. A challenge I received from a colleague a few years ago, and he himself is a doctoral level well-being researcher, but he said to me, Robert, I don't believe that the role of an expert is to tell people what to do. And if you think about this, especially in happiness studies, if you read blogs on happiness, you read books on happiness, you attend a workshop on happiness, you do in fact get a healthy dose of expert advice. You know, here are the 7 most important things about happiness. Here's 3 things you can do. Here are 4 activities. Here's, my patented process, whatever it is. And I think that's fine. But I was really curious as to what my colleague meant. If experts aren't here to advise, what are we here to do? And this is what he said to me. I believe that it is the role of an expert to help people think through their own decisions about complicated matters like happiness. So you're not here to tell them what to do. You're here to help them think through their own choices. And that is quite interesting because the truth is everyone here right now has a lot of really good intuitions about what will make you happy. You probably don't need me as a happiness researcher to come in and say, you know what, I think you might enjoy going to a barbecue, because you probably already know that, and you don't need a consultant, a barbecue consultant coming along telling you that barbecues on average are kind of fun and enjoyable events. But what experts do have typically is a sophisticated vocabulary. And it's in helping equip you with the vocabulary that you can start parsing apart what it is you're looking for when you go about the business of pursuing happiness. And so that is what I'm going to spend my time with you doing here today. I am going to talk about what I call the three-legged stool of happiness, just a metaphor for three different categories of happiness, three different ways to think about happiness. And I think let's not take it too seriously. Maybe there's 5 ways to think about happiness or 8 ways to think about happiness. But in the time allotted, I'm going to just cover 3 ways to think about happiness. I'm not describing the laws of nature. I'm just describing 3 useful frameworks for thinking about your own well-being. I love that there's a big group here, and I encourage you to use the chat function as I go. I'm just looking into this great eye of Sauron here, this camera pointing right at me. I can't see any of you. So, if I say something funny, it's nice for you to write, well, Robert, that's the most hysterical thing I've ever heard in my life. Why aren't you pursuing a line in stand-up comedy? I mean, that's really great real-time feedback for me to get. Or if you want to write like, Robert, I'm just curious about what kind of hair care products you use. Boom, put it right there in the chat. And then we'll have a little bit more kind of ongoing interaction. So feel free as we go to interact. Thank you. This means exactly what I'm talking about. Let's begin. The first type of happiness that I want to talk about is the type that sort of has the worst reputation, and it's often called hedonic happiness. And hedonic comes from the same stem word as hedonism. And because hedonic happiness is the idea that things feel good, people often dismiss hedonic happiness as selfish, superficial. It's just about pleasure. But I want to argue in favor of the importance of hedonic happiness for a few minutes. Hedonic happiness is a happy life, as it is commonly understood, a joyful life, an enthusiastic life, a life full of pleasures and enjoyments. So think, have you ever attended a sporting event where collectively your group cheered when your team scored or won a game? Have you ever had sex? Have you ever had a nice dinner? Have you ever taken a bubble bath? Have you ever relaxed at the end of a hard physical day? Have you ever met up with old friends and had a glass of wine and reminisced in a funny way about, the old days? All of those are aspects of hedonic well-being. That is, they all feel pleasurable. And personally, I think they add a lot of richness to life. If I said you had to live the rest of your life without ever experiencing enthusiasm or enjoyment, that would feel like a diminished life to you. And so I think that it is important that we take it seriously, that we do pursue pleasures, and that doesn't make us selfish. If we needed further argument in favor of hedonic well-being, I would say this. One aspect of hedonic well-being that's often overlooked is the idea of security. Feeling safe is a feeling. And when you feel safe, that is part of hedonic well-being. So not only is hedonic well-being pleasure, but it's also comfort, and it's also safety. And if you want to live a life with pleasure, comfort, and safety, then it makes sense to think about the things that you enjoy, feel comfortable around, or make you relax and lower that vigilance because it feels safe, i.e., non-threatening. So one aspect of your happiness is to pursue those routes. However, for many people, the idea of only pursuing pleasures kind of falls flat. They think, well, surely there must be more than just barbecues. And of course, there's more than just sporting events and barbecues and bubble baths. The next category is eudaimonic happiness, taken from the Aristotelian word eudaimonia, which is sort of having this virtuous spirit, if you will. And we often use that as sort of ancient Greek shorthand for meaning in life. And that the meaningful life does seem somehow distinct from the happy life. If the happy life is the enjoyable life, the meaningful life adds a different layer. But where people fall short on the meaningful life is when they don't unpack it. So people just sort of think that meaning means having a huge mission in life. And, think about college students who are kind of haven't figured themselves out yet. They haven't declared a major. They don't have a strong sense of identity. They're still kind of trying things on. You would say, wow, you must be living a meaningless life because you don't have an articulated mission. You don't have a meaningful life. But nothing could be further from the truth. When psychologists think about the meaningful life, we typically parse it into three different, sure, Gail, I will write that down. Eudaimonia. It's also sometimes spelled with an E in the middle. Typically, psychologists break down the meaningful life into three constituent parts. There are three components to meaning. Number one, purpose. When we say purpose, that is what most people think of when they think of meaning. But psychologists, when we say purpose, we mean you have enacted a behavior intentionally. So I am purposefully picking up my can of water. That is on purpose. That's all we mean. It can be something as mundane as drinking water on purpose. It means you simply intentionally meant to do something. And the more intentional you are across all your activities, the more purposefully you are acting. But you'll also note that picking up a water doesn't seem important in any way. It's purposeful, but it lacks a grander sense. And that's where we get the second aspect, which is significance. And significance means it has weight, it matters. There's some real impact to it. So you want to wed together purpose and significance. I want something more impactful than picking up water. So if I do something intentionally and it has a positive effect on others, or it fulfills my mission in some way, or it matters, or it makes the world a better place, if even modestly so, that is where significance comes in. And the third component is called coherence. And coherence is, does the world have meaning to you? Can you make sense of it? Do you have a story to tell about it? Do you understand your role in it and how the constituent parts work together? So let me explain these three things just with a quick story from my own consulting work. During the lockdown and the hardest part of the COVID pandemic, I was working with a team of nurses in a large hospital. And as you can imagine, frontline healthcare workers were really under a huge amount of stress, especially at that time. And one of the leaders, the nurse in charge, said to me, the people who work on this team are struggling with meaning. Now, I think that without a sophisticated vocabulary, I'd think that she meant they don't have a grand mission. But that's not what she meant. And this is where the role of expertise and a sophisticated vocabulary comes in. So I thought, are they struggling with purpose? Do they not have intentional actions to do? That doesn't sound right to me. When they show up to work and they're dealing with patients with COVID, they know exactly what to do. They're very intentional. They know about ventilators and drug regimes. They know about preventative health. They know about masking. They know lots of things and they can enact procedures and protocols. They are not struggling with purpose. So maybe they're struggling with significance. Do these nurses feel that their actions matter? And here I could go either way. If they're losing patients despite their best efforts, maybe they're feeling like their efforts don't matter. And so when they say they're wrestling with their meaning, what they really mean is, I'm wrestling with sort of this sense of failure or frustration that what I'm doing doesn't seem to matter. It's not making the desired impact. Or just as easily, maybe they are making the desired impact. Maybe they're saying, although it's tragic that we've lost a few patients, we're mostly saving people. And I feel like what I do does matter. I do feel significant in this fight against COVID. And then I arrived at that third bit, coherence. Can you make sense of what is going on? And I thought, aha, here suddenly is where it's easy to imagine that they're struggling, because none of us had a good mental narrative at that point for what COVID was all about, where we fit into it, where it was headed. And so in my work with them, what I helped them to do was tell a story about it. How is your experience today different than it was a month ago or 2 months ago? What do you think it will be like in 1 month from now? And do you have a narrative through line that just helps explain the trajectory of this? Do you have a sense of your identity and role in all this? And as soon as we started working on that, people were able to relax into it and feel a little bit like I do have more meaning. And so this is what I'm hoping to give you, is the idea that we don't just treat meaning as one monolithic thing, but rather that you can kind of parse it apart and think, well, maybe I'm actually kind of high in one aspect of meaning, but a little bit hungry in another aspect of meaning. The third area of happiness that I want to talk about, or well-being, is relatively new piece of research, and it is known as the psychologically rich life. So we have the happy life, that's enjoyment, comfort, safety. We have the meaningful life, that is purpose, significance, and coherence. And we have the psychologically rich life. The psychologically rich life is not necessarily pleasant, nor is it necessarily meaningful, but it is novel, it's experientially rich, it offers opportunity for the growth of wisdom or shifts in perspective. So one typical activity that's associated with having a psychologically rich life is studying abroad. People who have a study abroad experience are not always experiencing something pleasant. You get lost in the city you live in, you struggle with the language, you have to make new friends, you might experience culture shock, and it's not necessarily meaningful. Now, we really want to rush to closure on meaning and say, well, it's definitely meaningful, it's really going to make you a better person. But will it? Maybe it's just kind of partying with your friends in Barcelona. Maybe it's not all that meaningful. Maybe it's not changing the world. But what it is giving you a new perspective, giving you new experiences where you look back at your life and you say, wow, I did a lot. I had a rich life. I experienced tons, and my perspective expanded as a result. So one way that researchers study the psychologically rich life is they look at obituaries in newspapers and they have people rate it. How pleasant do you think this life was? How meaningful and how psychologically rich? So I'm just going to give you an example from the New York Times about Dr. Simone Ramo, an aerospace engineer who died at the age of 103. Dr. Ramo authored 62 books, developed intercontinental ballistic missiles, and became the oldest person in the world to receive a patent at the age of 100. After receiving his PhD in physics and engineering, he worked for General Electric and Hughes Aircraft until, fed up with management, he quit to launch his own company. He was quickly awarded a government contract to develop advanced missile technology, which he did in secrecy from his headquarters in a former Catholic church. Now, there wasn't a lot of joy in that, and we didn't even really hear a lot of sense of personal meaning or mission. In fact, he was kind of fed up with things. But what we did see is that he published books, he had an education, he worked at one place, he quit, he started a successful venture, he had this secret lair in a former Catholic church for some reason. And so it comes across as sort of a psychologically rich life. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, but that's the New York Times, and maybe people who have their obituaries in the New York Times are in fact just kind of people who live more varied and experiential lives. So I'll just read you one more, and this is from the Straits Times. This is Singapore's largest English language newspaper. And this is about Louis Cha, who died at the age of 94 in Hong Kong. Mr. Cha launched his career as a journalist in Shanghai before transferring to Hong Kong, where he authored an enormously popular series of martial arts history novels until 1972. And during this time, he also penned anti-Mao articles, which landed him on an assassination list. He escaped by fleeing to Singapore for nearly a year. And these same political views resulted in a blanket ban of his works in China, which lasted until 1984. Despite his popularity, Mr. Cha never authored another book after 1972. Instead, he continued to reread and revise his own novels, which he found deeply moving, so much so that he would cry upon rereading his favorite characters' breakups, even though those were breakups that he himself had authored. And so once again, we kind of see, wow, this guy did a lot. His life seemed full. And so when you go about the process of thinking about your own happiness, which is something I think we all do from time to time, I would love it for you to think about sort of these three elements. Am I having enough pleasure, security, enjoyment? That is just sort of that emotional thumbs up to life. If not, what might I change to get a little more of that? Alongside that, am I also experiencing a certain amount of intentionality, that purpose? Am I experiencing a sense of mattering, significance? Do I have a coherent story about myself? And do I experience a psychologically rich life? Do I have novel experiences, whether or not they're pleasant or meaningful? And for every individual person, your happiness profile, as it were, is going to be a little bit different. For some people, they're going to want a lot more pleasure and a lot less psychological richness. Other people, maybe, thrill seekers, are going to want a little bit more psychological richness relative to the amount of meaning or pleasure they have. So it's okay if it's not 33% in each one of those categories. You're going to have your own particular leanings. And even from time to time in your life, you're going to shift between which one of these things you're focused more on. But ultimately, it's my hope that you will be able to use this as just a framework, not telling you what to do, but just helping you think through your own well-being decisions. That's all I have for you. I'd love to use our time together to answer some questions or address any comments you have. I see Scott has something. Are there any terms by which a psychologically rich life might be described in literature? In other words, if I wanted to research this, yes, if you just look for psychologically rich life, you'll definitely find research on this. And I will even type in the name of the researcher. Shige Oishi is the person who is most associated with this line of research. Desmine seems that as people start to retire, they might go for a psychologically rich life. It really depends on the individual. I mean, there's some people that live the rich life from the get-go. They're a foreign war correspondent at age 20, and they're traveling all over the world, even though it's kind of unpleasant at times. So it really is going to be kind of individual. And in fact, in research, we find that the smallest sliver of happiness is psychological richness. I mean, people want a bit of that, but they don't want that necessarily to be sort of the main thrust of their happiness. How can we apply this to when encouraging students in their college journey? Well, I think much in the same way as I did here to you. I'm not saying I know what's best for you, but by equipping you with this vocabulary, my hope is you're going to be thinking about your own well-being in more sophisticated ways, that you'll be able to make more nuanced decisions and better decisions for yourself. So I would hope that that would be the case for the students with whom you work as well. And M, I'm not sure what you mean. Gratitude certainly is an important aspect of well-being, not taking things for granted. How does self-actualizing relate to this work? That's a big question. I mean, the idea of self-actualization is a pretty Western concept. The idea that we have a consistent self and that we can sort of step into our own highest potential. And I don't think that dismisses it because it's Western. I'm Western, so that is appealing to me, although that certainly won't have the same appeal to everyone around the globe. But I do think the idea that if you're living a meaningful life to you, making impacts that you find valuable, and you have enough richness that it's giving you perspective and that it's enjoyable enough, that is sort of, broadly speaking, the good life. And I think all of us are looking for and have a natural impulse to continue to develop ourselves through, am I helping others? Am I living my values? Am I growing as a person through novel experiences? Am I safe enough? Am I do I have things that I'm enthusiastic about? Do I have passions, as it were? And that's where you feel like a full self, is the more that you have all of those types of things. And I do think that spirituality can relate to any of these. So for some people, those elements of meaning will have a religious or spiritual dimension to them. Their values will be ensconced in their faith tradition. How they consider the threshold for what matters will be informed by their religious beliefs or their spiritual beliefs. So they're definitely not opposed to one another. But for people who are non-spiritual or non-religious, these things are also available because they're just broad human psychological tendencies. Oh, toxic positivity. I think that's pretty interesting. One of the things I like about thinking about happiness in this way is that it's not all about being enthusiastic and having a pleasurable or like a joyful life all the time. That sometimes when you engage in meaningful activity, it's pretty unpleasant. I had a friend who said he was just going to spend a year volunteering. And he said most of the volunteer work he did felt unpleasant while he was doing it, cleaning up after people in a hospital. He said it just wasn't enjoyable. However, when he left and he sort of reflected on it, he felt this really great, expansive sense of having done something good. And so that element was good, even though in the moment it wasn't particularly good. So I do think that toxic positivity is an important consideration, that we don't just want to push people all the time to be joyful and happy, and that other occasional emotions, sadness, guilt, those are part of the equation as well, and they're appropriate to feel in reaction to many different circumstances. I'll stop there. Simone?
Thank you so much, Robert, and everybody. Thank you so much for all your thought-provoking questions. I know we were only able to scratch the surface today. If you are interested in learning more about how to bring these kinds of topics to students, we do cover these in depth in our curriculum. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to send me an email. I dropped it in the chat. If you have any other questions for Robert, you can also send them to me, and I will happily pass them along and get back to you. And we're looking forward to seeing you at future events. And Robert, thank you so much for your time today. It was really a pleasure having you on. And with that, I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. I will share a slide that also has my email up on there. And again, we'd love to hear from you and look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.